Tonight begins a special two-part series on human trafficking. Now, before we get to the story, let's look at some statistics. Human trafficking is seen as exploiting a person through force, fraud, or coercion, and it can be sex trafficking or forced labor. A 2022 report states that at any given time in 2021, 27 million people were in forced labor globally. Victims can be U.S. citizens or of any nationality, age, socioeconomic status, or gender. It is estimated that 45% of American victims of human trafficking are caught in human trafficking through social media. Just 10% of Americans being trafficked follow random abductions. Human trafficking impacts communities big and small, including right here in Siouxland. In the first part of this two-part series, KTIV's Joe McMahon tells us how several organizations are helping those affected by human trafficking.
It's just important to know that sex trafficking is happening in Sioux City as we speak, and it's as easy to buy sex in Sioux City as it is to order a pizza.
While human trafficking is happening, it's rarely discussed.
No one talks about it, but we teach our kids how to hide from active shooters, but we don't teach them how to be safe from human trafficking.
The Siouxland Coalition Against Human Trafficking is trying to change that.
Our mission statement is to work towards abolishing all forms of slavery through education, collaboration, and advocacy. We do a lot of educational and awareness-raising efforts, and our focus is on prevention.
That education is for all ages, to show them what human trafficking looks like so they can spot it.
Well, we really try to inform parents especially, and students about what human trafficking looks like here in the United States, here in Siouxland.
The truth is, not a lot of people make it out of trafficking once they are in.
People don't make it out of trafficking alive. They either take their own life because of the situations that they're in. The people who were traffickers would willingly kill people rather than necessarily give them up. So they're either killed by their traffickers or oftentimes they take their own life.
Organizations are working to offer help to those trafficked and let them know there are ways out.
LMA's house is a healing environment where adult women who are survivors of sex trafficking can come to live and to begin their process of healing from the trauma that they've experienced in their life.
Haven House helps provide emergency shelter for men and women to help them get away from domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
If they need shelter and we have shelter available, we can put them in an emergency shelter. We will accompany someone to court if they need moral support. We can accompany to doctor's appointments for sexual assault kits, things like that. We help them apply for housing, state benefits.
While there are some organizations that help survivors, there aren't enough.
There aren't emergency shelters. There aren't enough programs that deal with what happens to a survivor after they've been trafficked.
Reporting in Sioux City, Joe McMahon, KTIV News 4.